Last Christmas is probably one of the first games I've played on this channel that I can truly call an indie game gem. It's a deceivingly simple point-and-click game you can play in your browser, and it only has 5 different rooms you can explore. That's it. And yet somehow it left me speechless after I'd finished it. I'll be honest, it had me fooled at first. I'm not sure if it was the off-kilter animations or the low-fidelity art style, or the sort of goofy bop playing in the background. There were some definitively odd choices for the dialogue options that feel almost like they might be Google translated, even though I'm pretty sure they're not. And while these voice lines often just leave you with far more questions after inspecting an item than before, I didn't think much of it at first. You'll likely spend around 30 minutes with this title before things really start to settle in. I suspect it'll only take around an hour, and that's if you get really stuck on some of the puzzles, which I'll get into later. And so I'd recommend a quick playthrough of it first, but I'll be summarizing the entire game in this video regardless. Last Christmas begins with no title screen, no exposition, no tutorial, no setup. I see this a lot in small indie games, and it's usually a hallmark of a lazy game. Usually. For Last Christmas, given this was an indie game jam submission, it sets up the mood perfectly. The in-browser experience, it just feels like you're playing some random Flash game, and this is only reinforced with the 2D art style and animations that are a little reminiscent of something like Happy Wheels. But just as I was starting to settle into this sort of dull and confusing atmosphere of the game, this happens. Horrifying.
Perfect. What just happened? Did I just imagine that? I really need to start taking it easy.
You probably need less of that freaking mulled wine. What in the world? I was honestly left a little slack-jawed and had to take a moment to recover, and I was still just utterly confused at the puzzle involving this alleged mulled wine I had just created, because the ingredients called for a freaking quote-unquote a throat sweet, throat sweet, TM, and other odd ingredients. And at this point I still had no idea what I was supposed to be working on next. To both the game's detriment and benefit, the puzzles are really obtuse. Eventually things start to click, but only once you've literally tried every possible combination of items. It took so long for me to actually solve each puzzle that I didn't get another jump scare like this for nearly 15 minutes. And in one respect, the puzzles are just rather difficult to solve, and I got really frustrated with the sometimes silly solutions at some points. Okay, but how does that help? But the extensive dead space between these enraging moments left me on edge. With every camera transition, I hadn't noticed it before, but upon entering a new room, the screen will fade to black and then slowly fade back in. And while this transition happens in the span of less than a second, it felt like an eternity after knowing that there existed a very real possibility that in the next room I clicked on, someone or something could be lurking behind the darkness. The creators have expressed some concerns over how jarring this first transition is, and how the rest of the game seemingly blindsides the player. I definitely jumped in my seat when this happened and was just absolutely shook for the next few minutes. And honestly, I think this is the selling point. It's like those creepypasta games that you just have to share with your friend, or the craze over watching people react to Five Nights at Freddy's or Doki Doki Literature Club for the first time. Okay! Something about the shock value alone is really interesting. And I'm really not trying to knock on the art style here, but it just didn't strike me as a game with very much depth at first. To be fair, the game was just thrown together in literally 14 days, which is an incredible feat, but it certainly looks like a game thrown together in 14 days. Well, at first. Going back through the game on subsequent playthroughs, I can definitely appreciate all of the work put into it now. And this is just another testament of how well put together Last Christmas really is. By the end of the game, you've had all of these jump scares in the different rooms, and all the while, you're either setting up these bizarre, romantic activities, like putting candles all over the bathroom and plopping a Christmas tree right into the floor, or you're just hanging a noose on the light There's a moment where the pieces start to come together, but not quite. The power goes out and you're forced outside. There's a gate, and I repeatedly tried to figure out a way to open this before. You know, it's that classic locked off area of a video game that just makes you want to go and explore it even more. And here, you know, the whole game just changes in its entirety. You walk all the way to the neighbors, and just when you'd expect there to be a transition into a different scene, the player comes wandering back down the driveway. And suddenly, all of those strange puzzles and odd dialogue choices, even putting window curtains on the bed for sheets, it falls into place. You're given one last task. Go to the light. You pick a room, it doesn't matter, and then you see the following scene. There's a note left behind, just kind of reiterating what you can already deduce, and this note really grounds the events you're seeing unfold before you. But all of those previous actions, the weird decisions, it is just so sad. It turns something in you to see a man like this trying to make his last moments comfortable, even if it means wrapping himself in stiff curtains to sleep, or making a fire out of sticks in a newspaper, or sticking an evergreen tree into the wood flooring. All of the humorous and odd elements of the game just become altered after that. The whole mood of the game opens up into this just larger frame. The context is widened in a really revealing and satisfying way. Perhaps the creator's comments here refer more to the fact that there is little to no foreshadowing of the darker turns later in the game. And I remember that the picture frame showing off scenes of The Shining, as well as the typewriter and the literal axe sticking out of the bathroom door, made me a little uneasy at first, but I genuinely assumed these were just quirky references and allusions to a somewhat arbitrary work. You know, in the outhouse, there's a newspaper referencing an exciting story about a clock tower in 1985, which I could only imagine was a reference to Back to the Future. And perhaps all of this was to set up the idea that the player would be traveling through time upon reaching the neighbor's house, or just the general uncanny experience of this whole spiritual world the player finds himself in at the end of the game. While these allusions may not have properly prepared me for the darker turn of events, I think this is why those events resonated with me so well. I was primed, but wholly unready. And I like that looking back, the game as a whole makes sense. It just feels so cohesive. I do want to note one final critique I have of the game design here at the end. During the final scenes, if the player tries to leave the house, Frankie expresses how he feels he can't leave. Now, I personally think that allowing the player the option to continually travel over and over to the distant neighbor's house would have been a reasonable choice to force the player back inside of Betty's cabin, instead of creating this glaring dead end with how the door currently works. However, I'm honestly on the fence about even that. Something about hearing Frankie say he can't leave really cements the idea that he's made up his mind. There is no second guessing here. There is no way out, and he's not even going to try to get out. Something about the player being unable to stop Frankie is a crucial element of this ending here. Now, PolyTely currently only has the 2 games on his website. Last Christmas was a collaborative game, but I'm pretty sure PolyTely is just a team of 1 for now. I follow Poly on Instagram, but I'd encourage you to check out both titles he has on itch.io. And I'm sure that whatever PolyTely has in store next will be worth a look. That's it for now, and I'll catch you next time.